Welcome to the latest edition of Dynamic Political Centrism, hosted by Alan Steinberg, produced by Dr. Yonatan Yoni Yaris. Our guest this week, Dr. Alvin Felzenberg, public intellectual, author, educator, and public servant.
Good evening and welcome. I am Alan Steinberg, the voice of Dynamic Political Centrism and the host of this podcast. Tonight, we have a very special guest, a person really of a historic dimension, Dr. Alvin Felzenberg. Al has succeeded at a national level in his career in three ways. Number one, he served in New Jersey state government as Assistant Secretary of State, where he played a major role in the development of the Newark Performing Arts Center, which is a real source of pride to the community. But even more, in his public service career, he was a spokesman for the 9/11 Commission, working as the chief assistant to former Governor Tom Kean, and also to Lee Hamilton, who co-chaired the committee. And that committee gave one of the finest performances in an issue of which could have been a national tinderbox, and Al handled it brilliantly. Secondly, he is a noted academic. He has a PhD from Princeton, not too shabby, and his knowledge of history and political science is basically expansive and knows no limitation. Thirdly, he has been an individual with a supreme sense of political instinct, and he's often been a consultant to political campaigns. So, Al, welcome, and we're delighted and honored to have you on the show.
Hi, Alan. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get into the show and the life of Al Felzenberg in particular, I'm going to start off tonight asking him about two events over the last 48 hours. We have a special joy on the show tonight. Our producer, Dr. Yonatan Yaris, is a father once again. How many children is this?
This would be number 7.
Well, I look forward. He is a doctor of education, and he has a special expertise in that. In a few weeks, when we have, actually next week, when we have Sean Spiller, who has been the president of the NJEA and is running for governor, I'm going to have Yonatan, Yoni as we call him, Dr. Yonatan Yaris, handle the education policy questions. I promise you one thing, two things in this vein. Number one, we the Jewish people have lost millions in the Holocaust, and every time someone has a child, to boost our numbers worldwide, I say they're doing, as we say, a real mitzvah. So we're proud of the mitzvah you have done. 7, I think you can stop now if you want, but at the same time, I would say this: we will not have a guest on a show with you from Planned Parenthood. We're proud of what you've done. So
I second everything Alan said. Thank you. Good luck to you.
Thank you, Al.
All the children. Thank you.
So mazel tov to you.
Yes, mazel tov to you.
Yes. Alan, you asked me to share a photo.
Oh, yeah, let's see it.
So that is the current.
Oh, there it is.
The current birth
Like it looks like he's wearing a tallis.
Yes, the hospital baby blankets come in tallis form.
No, it's lovely.
He's 9 pounds.
Yes.
He ought to play in the NFL playoffs this weekend. I can't believe
you're the
that.
youngest of 7 boys, you kind of need to make sure you come out with some girth on you. So you can 7 children, some girth on you.
Well, he's gonna have to resist the other 6 kids. So again, mazel tov, and we're glad we're lucky you made the show tonight.
Yes,
that's a beautiful thing.
Fortunately, we all came home today. Everyone's doing really well.
As we say in French, Baruch Hashem.
Yes. So
I want to focus on 2 major issues that I really feel we need the opinion of Al Felzenberg. Let me tell you what they are. Over the last, and I'll get into his life story and all the rest, but I want to make use of his expertise and his knowledge of history. Over the last 48 hours, there have been 2 events that really have had me in a really troubled state. And troubled is not a state that I attribute to myself very often, but I'll tell you what they were. Number one was the testimony of Pam Bondi in the hearings for her confirmation as Attorney General. And it is clear to me that she definitely will weaponize this Justice Department under Trump. I have no doubt about it. And that there is a high likelihood of prosecution of Liz Cheney and the other members of the January 6th committee, Al knows Liz Cheney very well. He knows the Cheney family very well. So I doubt that he can be emotionally detached from this. But I think that's going to happen. Number two was basically the events of the last 48 hours as well, when you've had a situation where the administration is coming in, people are getting confirmed, but at the same time, it is not clear as to whether they will take their orders from Trump or whether they will exercise independent judgment. But it is a very, very scary time. And we haven't had this, but even more notable, last night, and Al is very familiar not only with the individuals involved, but I'll point out how he is an expert on presidents. Last night, Biden's speech, I wish someone had given that speech from the Democratic Party during the campaign, where he talked about the oligarchy, the tech oligarchy, as a real threat to democracy. Mm-hmm. And he did that I thought he was very articulate on that, but let me ask you one, but there's two things I just want to mention, and then it's all up to you. Number one is I learned from you, I didn't learn from you, but you made me more conscious of this. Most of our presidents early on were plutocrats, but it wasn't really an oligarchy because they weren't acting in concert in the interest of their economic class.
Right.
But they were plutocrats. But now, for the first time, we have an oligarchy. I heard someone on television, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but he said that right before the Civil War, I've studied the Civil War, but this is the first time that I thought of it this way, that basically what you had in the Confederacy was an oligarchy.
Yes.
And they wanted to maintain power, and that was as powerful reason for the Civil War as slavery. Right. So, Al, I want your reaction to this.
Well, you're right. You're right. The North was pluralistic even in the business sense. I mean, there were bankers, there were ranchers, there were self-made people, there were small business, if they called it that then. The Confederate leadership was all slave owner, all of the oligarchy class, all of the ruling class. Biggest irony in the Civil War was most of the people who fought in the war did not own slaves. Most poor whites did not own slaves. They were fighting for all sorts of other reasons, like protecting their homes from Sherman's troops that don't discriminate what side you're on in the political battle, or the house burns down, you got a problem. There were also some who fought for were racist and thought that their whiteness depended upon subordinating blacks. There were lots of reasons that they fought, but in terms of the class, in terms of the people who sent them, they were all indistinguishable. I can't name one self-made man, or, well, I can't say woman because there were none, in the Confederate higher command. In Lincoln's case, you can probably say that too about women, but it's true. They started with humble backgrounds. They rose from their own bootstraps, and they wanted to leave the door open for others. Lincoln's statement about a man goes to work and he hires himself out, and then he saves enough money so he can hire an employee. Then an employer does the same thing, and he hires somebody else. Before you know it, you got a growing economy. That wasn't the Southern way. Everyone stayed in their place, and there was no sense for movement, social advancement, or any of the rest.
Well, Al, you've just proven two things. Number one, Al has been a notable professor of political science and history at Harvard. He was a distinguished fellow at Yale. He still teaches at University of Pennsylvania. So he is in the elite of professors. And from the way he described this, you can understand why. I assume that many of our listeners would want to take a course from him after hearing that. But there's one more point you made implicitly and explicitly, which I was surprised to hear this on television. But you can either verify it or amend this somewhat. What we have going on now, and this is where Biden was tremendously effective. He shouldn't have been the candidate, but someone else in the Democratic Party could have given that speech. The point is that what you have now is a false alliance between the tech oligarchy that he spoke about, and also the white working class which has been deceived into thinking this oligarchy represents him. Is that
Yeah.
also along the lines of the
Yeah.
Confederacy?
Yeah, I think, yes. I should add one thing out of sense of fairness. We've heard a lot about oligarchs the last weeks. We've heard a lot about Bezos and Zuckerberg and the Tesla guy. All right, Musk. Okay. Is George Soros a plutocrat? He's elected a hell of a lot of people. I don't know how much he spent. I think he spent $40 million to elect Hillary Clinton. Is Mrs. Stephen Jobs a plutocrat? Right now, we're cheering a number of First Amendment writers in the Washington Post for trying to protect their not only their livelihoods, but freedom of the press in the United States. 5 or 10 at least have left the Post for the Atlantic. And others I didn't have to read the paper tomorrow. 100 people called a meeting with Bezos to protest the paper's policy. Is Mrs. Jobs a plutocrat? There was a column in the New York Times on the business page, which is probably the only thing worth reading these days in the paper, New York Times. And it pointed out, it quoted the editor of the paper. She sits in on interviews. She has to say in who's hiring. She's not the boss. She doesn't tell them who to hire. But she has more influence than any of the people they just hired. Now, is she a plutocrat? Is the press carrying on just because the biggest ones are supporting Trump? If we want to get to the core of this, we have to go back. I hate to quote Ralph Nader, but some of the things he was talking about, in the early 1970s, if you put a limit on how much I can contribute, and a billionaire can give the same amount personally, but any amount through a PAC, it doesn't have to announce it, whether it's left or right. The Republicans may be in the seat at the moment, but we got to talk about this. And he just gave George Soros the Medal of Freedom. Now, I'll let others decide whether that's better than Mrs. Adelson, or
Adelson, yes.
Thank you, or Rush Limbaugh, or any of the other people. But he gave it to him, and I'm very concerned about it. If we don't like the decriminalization of shoplifting, if we're tired of calling a cashier to CVS to open up lock and key, a razor blade, so I can take a shave to go to work, that's his doing. He elected 25 DAs. He decided that he couldn't elect Hillary Clinton no matter what he had spent. There's nothing to do with Hillary Clinton. He made a decision, and he put it in local races. So let Biden talk about that. I'm glad he quoted Dwight Eisenhower. I do see a parallel, no question, in that. But at this point, it's time to pass the baton. And I think America's kind of ready to see Joe have a wonderful retirement, live a wonderful life, and enjoy his grandchildren.
Well, that is true. But the question is, it's uncontestable that the Democrats have their plutocrats also. And I'm not trying to raise one party over the other. But the question is there a countervailing oligarchy? Because
I gave you three or four names.
No, I understand that, but are they acting in concert? I'm not arguing. That's the key question.
I like Mrs. Jobs. I've seen her at a number of charity events.
I don't even know her.
Well, her heart's in the right place, and she thinks her heart's in the right place, and maybe it is in the right place. But we had the editor say she has a role in who works there. Does she have a role in what editorials they run and pull? And can they write critical articles about some of the heroes on the left? I don't know. This has just started. Jennifer Rubin quit the Post yesterday. I don't know where she's going now. I'd like to know how this meeting went, but I think there is a lot on the other side, and it may not be as many as I said, but there are enough to worry me.
I don't say you're wrong. I do think that what we have to observe is whether they act in concert or not. It may not be the worst thing in the world if at least if you have an oligarchy that is nefarious. If you have a countervailing oligarchy, that would not be the worst thing.
Well, I can't prove it's working in concert in a group within a party that just lost. But had Harris won, I guarantee you the three people I met would have been on the stage. And we have all.
I have no doubt.
Well, we have these plutocrats on the stage, and I don't know what they're talking about to themselves. I don't know. And I don't know that the unity is going to last very long. I think at some point, the president is going to decide that he's the president, and this has gone on a little too long. And he can start that Tuesday morning. He might decide to. I don't know. I'm not predicting it, but we've had enough of this, I think. And I think the American people are figuring a lot of this out. So I'm not defending what's going on. I'm just saying, no matter what happens, the other side gets a pass. George Soros started out trying to spread liberty and freedom. To escape, he left the Soviet Union. He started a number of democracy programs. Then suddenly he decided that he hated the United States. He did everything he can to weaken the United States, the criminal justice system, get rid of bail, on and on and on. And it's ironic to have, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden go on television denouncing the policy and praising the benefactor. We've had this all year. Okay.
Well, it's going to be interesting.
Right.
George Soros is very negative towards Israel also.
I know that.
Very, very negative. However, what my rabbi in Highland Park told me is he's been very charitable to members of the Jewish community who were refugees and all the rest. I'm not making a case for him.
I hope that's true.
I'm not making.
No, I hope that's true. But I don't think he should pick the president. I don't think he should pick the DA. And he puts his own PACs together and his own finances committees together, and we don't know who's giving to them. And they've turned Philadelphia and San Francisco into places that I no longer like to visit. And everyone I know who goes will tell you that. I mean, the mayor of San Francisco San Francisco will tell you that right now. All right, but yes, I agree. We have a plutocracy, and I believe right now the spotlight is on the incumbent president and incoming president, and a lot depends on what he does.
It is going to be a subject of very watchful waiting.
Oh yes, Alan.
And if the Democrats are able to make an issue of this, I'm not saying they will or won't, that would be the best message they could have, because right now they have no message.
They have no message except opposition, and what they're doing is fighting about whether they're going to resist or try to enact an opposition program. So the result, you have nothing. They checkmate each other. That we've seen this for the last several years, and
agreed.
I don't know what's going on. I don't know what Senator Schumer's strategy is. I don't know what the strategy of these hearings are. I know they assigned out the questions. They to save time. They assigned out the various issues very well, but I don't know what he wants to see in the end. He's not going to get somebody the Democratic Party wants to be Attorney General, not under this president.
Also, we're going to have to see who wins the Democratic National Committee chair position. I think that's going to be important.
I have some ideas on that, but we'll talk about it later. You want to talk about
just give me one. I don't get to have you on my show every day. Then I'll get into you.
All right, I'll tell you. I don't think the National Committee right now, seeing these 12 or whatever candidates, I don't think their problem right now is mailing lists and fundraising and organization. They need a strategy. They need a vision. They need a person of presidential caliber, willing to go on the set, willing to go out and talk, willing to write articles and speeches, who has the visibility of a possible president. I'm talking about bringing back Terry McAuliffe. I'm talking about bringing Pete Buttigieg. Friends of his tell me that he's scouting about in Michigan to see if he can run for governor. Well, it seems to me a Democratic state like Michigan has a deep bench. He's just moving in. We have a gubernatorial primary in 2 years. He loses that primary, he's finished. He goes to the DNC, which he ran for once before. This time he's got a national constituency, and he will be on TV a lot. And he will hold them to account. He's done a great job with that. And those are 2 names. There were probably others, but
what about Martin O'Malley?
I don't know much about him. I know he was governor when I moved to Washington. He's been very silent about this, which means he's playing an inside game, not an outside game. He's calling probably the DNC people in various states, so I don't know anything how he would do. He ran for president once. I don't know him, never met him. But I gave you at least 2, and there are probably more hanging out. Last point, we need somebody who can do for the Democratic Party to answer the president now what Larry O'Brien did for Kennedy and then Johnson, what James Farley did to the 4 people they threw at Roosevelt, or at least the first 2.
Right.
And what Haley Barbour did with Bill Clinton. Haley Barbour was the happiest warrior we ever had at the national committee of either party. Those are the people they need, not junior state senators, no matter how smart they are, not Wisconsin chairman. They have Wisconsin. I don't know what this guy brings to Florida, what he brings to New Jersey.
He's not really a known quantity, from what I can say.
But I mean, that's where the activists are going. And I think they need somebody who wants to elect a president and knows how.
Al, you just gave an excellent summary. They're having all kinds of TV shows on this. I had Al Felzenberg, and I got a better presentation. So we're in your debt about this. Okay,
I can't help that.
We're going to have you back again. Okay,
I'd like to do it again.
Okay. Well, anyway, let me get on with the theatrical presentation of the life of Al Felzenberg.
Okay.
Al Felzenberg, you were born in Irvington, correct? Is that where
I was born in Beth Israel Hospital in Newark, January 9th, 1949.
Same year I was born.
Mazel tov. It was a good year.
Yeah, it was.
We moved to Irvington when I was 5, and I graduated Irvington High School in 1967.
That's when Irvington was really a Jewish community, from what I recall.
There were parts that were, there were parts that were less so. I was in the part that was less so, but you're right. Had a large Jewish community around Chancellor Avenue. That's where my grandmother lived for many years. And it's where the poor boy in Goodbye Columbus, Philip Roth.
I remember that movie very well.
Richard Benjamin. Yeah, meets the rich girl from Short Hills. He grew up, actually, in this case, Weequahic neighborhood of Newark, but it was on the line of Chancellor Avenue in Irvington. So
I have to mention something about Weequahic. It was one of the great, I was never there except after it was a Jewish community. It was one of the great Jewish communities of America.
Yeah.
That it seemed overnight, due to the race riots,
right.
They all fled to the suburbs, including West Orange, where I lived a number of years.
It was the best high school in the state, the first to offer Russian, the first to offer Chinese. People would clandestinely say that they lived at their aunt's house so they can go to school there. Some were caught, many were not. But it was the envy of the world. The other one that was equally strong, if not stronger, was Columbia High School in South Orange.
That is the foundation on which your career was launched.
Yes.
And well, no, it's significant. Let me tell you why. I'm going to the next event. In fact, I'm going to use the 3 books that have been major commercial successes of yours as a basis for this show. Okay. And the first one is, I'm pulling it out from over here.
Yes.
I don't know if my viewers can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see it a little bit. Yeah,
okay. Right. The book is Governor Tom Kean. It's written by Al. It is the authoritative biography of Tom Kean. He had the former governor's cooperation from the New Jersey State House to the 9/11 Commission. Now, Al, tell us about how you first met Tom Kean and the role you played for him. You were both a issue advisor to his, but also a member of his, a high member of his administration early on. Tell us a little about the.
Well, I met him in winter of 1968 at Rutgers Newark, where I was going to school. I was a freshman there, and a name you know, Dominic Mazzaghetti, Newark. Later moved to Morris County.
I know the name. Yep.
He was the chairman of the College Republicans at Rutgers. And he knew that my parents were Democrats. He knew that I was sort of floating around. And he said, smart fellow, Dominic, what are you doing Saturday? I said, I don't know. What do you have in mind? He said, can you meet me at the Newark Airport in, the Newark restaurant at the Newark Airport? Yes. He said, newly elected freshman Assemblyman Thomas Kean is going to join us. He wants to talk to you about an interesting project. So we sat down, and I couldn't believe he was an assemblyman, number one. Voters, first time out, used to ask me if he was old enough to vote. He looked like one of the students. And with his blazer and khakis, he even looked like a graduate student. He didn't look that much older than I was.
He wasn't a model sartorial splendor.
No. Well, it wasn't bad, but this was a hell of a change from the D's and Do's Democrats who hung around the Essex County courthouse. I used to say that to Tom that we had a bi-party system bipartisan system in Irvington. We had these Democrats and those Democrats. And that's the truth. So he didn't look like any of them. How did they look? They all had fedora hats or cheap versions of fedora hats. They all had the equivalent of zoot suits that they didn't know gone out of fashion in the 50s. They all chopped a cigar that was never lit. They all had keys and coins in their pocket that they jingled all the time. And they hung around waiting for the county chairman to tell them what to do. That was my vision of the Democratic Party. This wasn't the Democratic Party of John and Robert Kennedy.
It sounded like the Democratic Party of Steve Adubato.
Well, he had a soft side.
Well, yeah, he was not corrupt, and he was
not corrupt, and he was not a racist. And
right,
he took on George Wallace in Newark in a section where Wallace was doing very, very well. And yes, but so he was of the upper scale, but he was really of the same demographic background of these guys. Hated.
By the way, I am an admirer of his. None of what I just said was pejorative.
I was too. No, I was too. Yeah. So Tom says, what are you studying? And I tell him, history. What are you reading? Now, I forgot the book, but it was about the antebellum South. I can't remember the author. And he said, are they still reading that ancient thing? This is what we get for all we fund Rutgers. So I started laughing. He said, this thing was out of date when I was in school. All right, we laughed. Okay. Eventually, we get to why he wanted to see me. He tells me that Ray Perlis has been chairman of the RNC, the former state chairman of Ohio. And we're sitting at the Goldwater, the aftermath of Goldwater's defeat. And Bliss says, I got a lot of cities in my state. You've got a lot of cities in your state, Assemblyman. We can't keep getting clobbered if we want to be in the gang. We may not win these places, but we have to compete. We have to get candidates. We have to make a show. And would you be willing to have a morning seminar with all layers of government? We'll bring in Case to talk about life at the legislature in Washington with the Senate. We'll bring in congressmen. It turned out to be Frelinghuysen. We'll bring in others whose names will come to me. Henry Patterson, who was mayor of Princeton, one of the last two Republican mayors of Princeton in the last probably 80 years. The other one was Robert Cauley, who was just like him. They're both Rockefeller Republicans. Except Henry was more of an independent. He had a group called Republicans for Gene McCarthy, and neither side knew.
That's independent.
But neither side knew where to register his vote. And McCarthy was on the Democratic ballot when he wasn't, so he had to write him in on the Republican primary. He was an interesting character. Okay, and I will handle the state, and we got a gubernatorial election next year. Maybe we can get some of those candidates to come. All right.
What year is this exactly?
Winter, February of '68.
Oh, okay. It was a year before Cahill was elected.
A year before the gubernatorial election.
Right.
And he says, I know this is hard. I know you're not going to find many Republicans at Rutgers Newark. And we want to have it there because it's the year after the riots. And we want to say that we haven't given up on the cities and on African Americans. And, what goes around comes around, and losers today will be winners tomorrow. I can't disappoint him. This is his method of persuasion. I can't go back to him and say, the man he's just called the Bright Star can't find anybody to volunteer and put this program on and get students out. And, he could look so disappointed sometimes. This is something I remember in the 9/11 Commission. I said, how did he persuade you to do things you didn't want to do? And the response was, he could look so disappointed.
Well, he manipulated your soft spot.
Well, he got to me. I don't know if he manipulated it.
I'm not saying that negatively.
I understand, but he it was the Kean charm anyway. So I said yes. And, one thing led to another. And it was a very successful program. We didn't have a governor, so I'm remembering John Chafee came down from Rhode Island to round this out with a state executive, and Tom spoke about the legislature. I think Bateman spoke about the state senate. I don't know. I don't remember all of these names, but anyway, it was a great hit. And Tom was put on a number of urban affairs committees his first year in the legislature. As soon as he walked in the door of the legislature, this was the first legislature that where suburbanites, thanks to the redistricting decisions of the Supreme Court, had a majority of the seats. Redistricting was brought by urban interests that wanted to redistribute power from rural to urban New Jersey, and it turned out more power went to the suburbs, and the suburbs formed their own caucus of Republicans against the South Jersey types, and that's one of the ways Tom got into leadership. But he got the lowest rung in the chain because he didn't want to show that he was a radical. He worked with his elders, but we got to have control here. His partner was Dick DeCourt, Bergen County, and they did marvelous things together. All right, that's how I met him. And
well, the significance of that is this. I'm going to have a show that may be totally dedicated to Kean, but I wanted to give the viewers an understanding of how you started working with Kean. And your book, the amazing thing about the book is that as close as you were personally to him, I always admired the fact that the book is not hagiography.
I try to keep it that way.
Show the book. You're having a better time showing it than I am. Okay. That is I think, here's the significance. We have a gubernatorial campaign coming on. It's going to be very hard fought. I think every contestant in that gubernatorial campaign should read that book.
I hope they do.
I hope so too, because it never loses its relevancy. So that book was written in 2006, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah. But then you went on to write another book that was of national significance. And the book was called The Leaders We Deserved.
Yes.
And a few we didn't. It was a rating of presidents.
Yes.
Now, let me tell you what I thought distinguished this book. Number one was the criteria you used for evaluating presidents. I don't know, you can spell that out. I don't have to do that.
Right.
But I thought your criteria was ideal, and it was a basis for a good comparison of the presidents. And you were ahead of most. I remember years ago when I think it was Arthur Schlesinger that did a rating of presidents, and I thought it was terrible because you and I are both admirers of Dwight David Eisenhower. Dwight David Eisenhower had 6 monumental accomplishments. He ended the war in Korea. He kept us out of Vietnam. He also established the interstate highway system, which really made us one nation and established suburban America. He enacted the first civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. He also enforced the law at Little Rock, even though he was reluctant because he knew that violence could ensue. And then his speech on the military-industrial complex, I knew they were going to show that speech.
No, absolutely, yes.
I knew they were going to show that.
Yeah.
So you were way ahead of everybody in giving Eisenhower his due. So you were ahead of your time. Now, let me tell you what I see, not as a criticism of your book, but I'm curious as to your reaction to this. Perspectives of presidents change over time.
Right.
I thought that your book has really stood the test of time, but I'll give you an example, and this is not a criticism. At the time you published your book, LBJ, most people had a mixed view of him.
Right.
Today, the view has gone up, basically because of the relevance of civil rights coming back and the Republican attitude towards it, which is, I think, unfavorable. And the other thing is, your generation and mine, Medicare is such a big part of our lives.
Yeah.
So for that reason, he has a higher profile. I think that anyone who does a presidential rating, and this is said positively of you, is always going to have to bear the fact that these ratings could change. But I don't know what an author can do about it unless he publishes a supplemental article or something like that. What's your view on that?
Well, new facts come to light, and the new facts round out the picture as papers have been opened. That's what happened with Ike. Johnson's papers are purely open now, I hope. But, we might not like where he comes, but facts are facts. All of the skill he showed in Congress to pass Medicare and civil rights and voting rights and Medicaid and open housing and Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I can go on for half hour. All those skills, all those leadership skills, the Johnson treatment, all right, failed him when he was talking about Vietnam.
Exactly.
He wouldn't talk to experts. He blew up at them. He used all the Johnson treatment to pass civil rights by arm twisting people not to bring it up. There's a tape of Dirksen saying, I'm supposed to be the opposition leader, and I spent all afternoon on the floor defending you from your own party. This can't keep going on. And all you had a very impressive group of Democratic liberals who supported all the things I just mentioned, but were early doves on the war. McCarthy and McGovern included, but also senators from Iowa, senators from Massachusetts, besides Teddy Kennedy, but including Teddy Kennedy, Brooke, Percy. They were bipartisan, but I would say, Javits, I would say you got maybe 15 to 20 senators. Fulbright, I can go on. And he never decided, well, they could break their arms. He could tell them not to run in primary. He could get primary opponents to them and get them out of Congress. But he never listened to them on other strategies. There's a story that one of Johnson's biographers, Randall Woods, tells. He's having a meeting with McGovern, early McGovern, in 1964, so early. And he raises the war. And he says, well, you know, Mr. President, Harry Truman may have erred letting the French back so soon. They were driven out. They hadn't done anything to us in the war. They were fighting the Japanese pretty hard. And maybe he made a mistake. And maybe we could have turned Ho Chi Minh, or at least Titoized him. And Johnson says, you know, I got boys dying in the jungles. You're talking to me about history. You and that GD Fulbright. Tired of hearing you intellectuals. You both have PhDs. Get out of here. I mean, that was an afternoon with Johnson.
I guess he didn't have much regard for intellectuals, I guess.
Well, you know, as wonderful as he was, his biographers don't list too many books he read. He read the budget. And whatever he read, he tossed away once the bill was passed, and nothing clicked. Just the opposite. He could talk great detail about public housing projects and taxes and all the rest of it. So, I mean, you know, what's there is there. If a student gets a C or a C minus in French university, and then he spends, you know, 2 years in Paris and comes back fluent, they're not going to raise his grade in his report card in college. That's what he got. So, in my opinion, I have changed very few grades. I was very proud that I gave Jimmy Carter a 5 for character and low grades on everything else.
I think that's an accurate appraisal.
And I stand on that.
It's accurate.
Even though the first line in my book is character is destiny. Well, not always.
Well, that's true.
These weren't character flaws. These were.
I think going back to Johnson 1 second, just a brief thought. I think there was someone named Eric Goldman who wrote The Tragedy of Lyndon Johnson.
Eric F. Goldman. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he was one of the few genuine intellectuals. Because I'm going to make a transition in a second to your next book.
Okay.
But he didn't last that long, I don't think.
Well, two things happened. I mean, Johnson wanted to be the liberals' next JFK, and Schlesinger left. And the media was so in love with Camelot and all of that. And we wanted somebody, a liberal like Schlesinger. People around him like Crucial Decade and some other books Goldman wrote. He supported the liberal program, the whole ADA thing. He went to the White House. They didn't listen to him. He got frustrated that they weren't listening to him. They weren't asking his advice. He held the Schlesinger job. But of course, as Buckley pointed out, the joke with Schlesinger was Schlesinger didn't have this much influence either, but nobody knew it. Buckley wrote a parody,
He was great for these pithy thoughts, Buckley, that really it could embarrass somebody, but it was almost always the truth.
Well, so the tragedy of Lyndon Johnson was really the tragedy of Eric Goldman, because Goldman went back to Princeton and no one in the department talked to him, history department.
All because he served Johnson?
Yes. And he was called a war criminal wherever he went. He was blackballed by his colleagues. He went to the president of Princeton and said, I don't want to resign, but this is getting impossible. And they gave him an office in the physics department, where maybe he had colleagues, maybe he didn't, but he hung on till he retired or eventually died. It was a terrible tragedy to him. And then, like now, the faculty caved and didn't tell students to respect differences of opinion. And the war protests at Princeton were a lot milder than at Harvard and Columbia, like preppy protesters, what they called it. But they never said, listen, this man is a distinguished scholar. You might learn something from him. You might disagree with him, but it's not the Princeton way to name call. But that didn't work. That didn't happen. So
it's a shame for academic freedom's sake.
Well, it's terrible. I think it's one of the biggest problems we have.
But the intolerance is a super problem.
It's terrible.
It really is. But that leads me to a transition here. And that is, of the three leading books you wrote, it was my favorite of the three. It was called A Man and His Presidents, The Life of William F. Buckley. Do you have that book there?
Yeah, somewhere here. Keep talking.
Okay. I'll put it in front of my face.
Yeah, here it is. Here it is. Okay. All right, here it is. I want to say
I've read this book more than once because I was a super fan. There it is. That picture of Buckley and Reagan is iconic. Yeah. I have seen that in more contexts. I think the National Review for years made use of that picture. You've written for the National Review.
I have. That photo was not taken by PBS. That photo was taken by a photographer that Buckley personally paid to take some great shots when he was on the set. He didn't know he was being photographed. I don't know the photographer's name, but it's probably in the book. But
it's a great photo.
It's been used a great deal. What he's doing is he's telling the governor, who was just elected president, or elected governor, excuse me, we're gonna be on in about 2 minutes. I'm gonna ask you this, and that. I'm gonna ask you why you did this, and that. And you might want to take a minute to look at these talking points if you don't mind. And if you don't want to answer them, you want to change your subject, fine. But that's what they were doing. You can see he's holding up a piece of paper. Reagan's got a pen out and his glasses on. So there you go.
Well, that leads me to another book that you and I have both been critical of because I think it's counterfactual, and I think it is unfair and paints an inaccurate portrayal. Right. And that's the new book by Max Boot, and it's about Reagan. There was a book that I thought was first class. It was written by William Imboden. And it was a book that was all about the Reagan. It was called The Peacemaker, because Reagan, I think in history, in terms of the economy, you can have different views because of the enduring deficit.
Of course.
But in foreign policy, he was an absolutely great president, without question. And this book really went through. It was factual. It identified all his successes, which Max Boot lampooned. But I thought it was terribly unfair. I liked the review that was written by Andrew Robbins. He's known as I read that he is the Lord of Belgravia.
He has been. Boris gave him a title. He's in the House of Lords. He's also, I think, Churchill's best biographer after Churchill. And
also, he did the book about George III.
Yes, that's right. He did. And it's a good book of George III. But he also wrote about Napoleon. He has a piece on how the GIs won the war, the D-Day cover this past summer. He's very prolific. Look, I've read most of the books about Reagan. I read Brand's. I read Bill Spitz, which isn't bad. He was a Hollywood writer, but he got the politics right. I read Reagan's memoir. I read Hamilton's book on Nancy. I reviewed Imboden for National Review.
That's what got me to read the book. I read your review.
Now, I don't understand what Max is doing. I don't know Max. He proudly saw himself as a neocon, which, by the way, Reagan never was.
Never.
Never was. He was constrained, but he was strong in certain issues. But it's an odd book in the sense that everything that went right in the Reagan administration was somebody's doing but Reagan. It was Nancy. It was Baker.
Gorbachev,
it was Schultz. It was Gorbachev. It was Thatcher. Everything went wrong. It was Reagan's fault. So who found all these brilliant people that he's praising who did the thing right, including Jim Baker, who deserves a honor from me? I don't understand this. I don't know much about his background. I know he has had a very good life. He's working at the Council of Foreign Relations. A lot of his foreign policy stuff is strong, but has a neocon twist, which is not a crime. I'm not one, but it's not a crime. They had a case to make. I don't know. Robert says that I can't disagree that it's partisan and it's left-wing pablum. I don't know what got into him.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I can use to dispute the underlying credibility of the book. I once saw Richard Darman on TV, as deputy chief of staff. Darman, no one could question his integrity.
No.
He said that every night, they always said how Reagan was watching TV at night, Mary Tyler Moore and all these shows. Well, Jerry Ford was a master of watching TV shows at night. But Reagan would take all of these papers. It would be a whole stack. It would be a big stack of papers. He would take it up to the residence. Oh. And when Darman got up in the morning, Reagan had made notes on
no question.
One of these papers.
They're all in the Reagan library.
That he was disengaged is false.
No, they're all in the Reagan library. I don't know what he looked at. Let me give you 2 parts as we, move on maybe to the end and do it again. But in the case of Reagan,
we have time, Al. Don't worry.
Okay, all right. When Reagan walked this earth, liberals underestimated him, and even some conservatives underestimated him. They thought he was dumb. I mean, Clark Clifford, the great Cold Warrior, great genius behind Harry Truman's policies, I call him an amiable dunce. Nixon thought he wasn't very bright, but he thought his heart was in the right place, needed help. And we go to Reagan manages to defeat an extremely popular governor of California by 1 million votes, who the press loved, Pat Brown.
Yeah.
And then he beats Jesse Unruh, who was going to be the new Franklin Roosevelt and the new not states' rights, but state power, laboratories of democracy kind of speaker of California. Beats him. Beats Jerry Ford. Eventually, he doesn't win the nomination, but he makes it very difficult for Ford to be president after that primary, particularly after Ford made a mistake of his life and asked Reagan to give the parting comments at the 76 convention.
It ended up being one of the greatest convention speeches I ever heard in my life.
Then he beats Carter. All right. But he's not done yet. Since Reagan left this earth, his story has destroyed Evan Morris, who tried to get to Reagan in a book in which he wrote himself into it as a fictional character. So you can't tell which parts of it are fiction and which parts are not.
You're talking about the book Dutch?
Dutch. Yes. All right. Then Pearlstein writes a very good book on Goldwater at the beginning of the conservative movement. I wrote a very positive review of that. Then a hatchet job on Nixonland. And then he basically drives a truck into a wall on Reagan. It reads like a review of the CBS News for 8 years. There's almost no analysis you can grab to, except the guy was bad, and the guy was racist, and the guy was this or that, without any evidence of this, in my opinion. So I guess Max is the latest one to fall into the trap. A lot of people like Clark Clifford took him at face value. Big mistake.
He was one of the wise men, so to speak.
I have a couple of stories. Some involve Tom Kean, but it's a extraordinary question. You'll remember the student struggle for Soviet Jewry.
Yes, very much. I
Ronald
was
Reagan.
involved.
Well, then you know that Ronald Reagan not only managed to get them out, but allowed them, with Gorbachev, allowed them to choose. They had to go to Vienna and decide they want to get aligned to Tel Aviv or aligned to America. That's around the time, I believe, that Max and his family came to the United States from Russia. I don't know the whole story, but he was born in Russia. His father's a professor. And he was a smart fellow. We went to Berkeley and a lot of other places we respect and what have you.
He may have been smart. He wasn't very wise.
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know what's driving this.
Well, let me tell you just a quick thing by a person you were very close to, Tom Kean.
Yeah.
I had never heard this story before, but Kean told me a story that proved beyond any reasonable doubt the role that Reagan had in the students' struggle.
No doubt, yes.
Soviet Jewry. He said that at one point, Kean went to him about getting a certain prisoner out.
Yep.
And Reagan was totally engaged. If he wasn't engaged, Kean would have told me. He said he was totally engaged. He said, look, I want to get him out. I have a relationship with Gorbachev now. I'm talking to him about this. But Reagan was smart. He didn't make a whole big public to do
exactly
about it.
Right.
He did it off camera, and he succeeded. Reagan was one of the seminal figures of the struggle for Soviet Jewry.
But if you
take it down in Jewish and Russian history as a man of goodness and greatness for what he did.
If you take him at face value, none of that happened. He acted behind the scenes. He didn't need to be have press every hour. He knew that he was a good person, whatever you want. I talked to Tom about it too. It's in the book. He not only got I think Boris Kozlov was his name. No, it's not. Boris, I'll think of it. And the governor, the strategy was that they would adopt, famous people would adopt refuseniks who had made a lot of press in Russia and were on the bad list. And so they don't get arrested. They would bring in the press, Soviet and other. And these people who adopted them would talk to them. So Tom called him from the governor's office, and there were hundreds of people in the room. He had to talk with this man. And then later, he had this chat with Reagan that you described. But when he met with Reagan, Reagan said, Tom came with a group, and he said, listen, ladies and gentlemen, I have to ask you one thing. Do you want to get these people out? Or do you want me to make a big splash and have the whole world demonstrate, call them every name in the book, and not get too many people out except get their backup? So they said, well, of course we can get them out. We want them out. All right, listen to me. He said to Tom, you give me a name. You give me a list of names. I don't know how many were on the list. And when I see Gorbachev, I will give him the list. And I will tell him, you're not reading anything about this, but these are the people I want released before these people go back to their homes. He did that. Maybe he got thousands out. But he did this on so many issues that I could tell you. No, he didn't do it on Meet the Press. He didn't do it in front of Max Boot or some of the other biographers. But it was done, and the people know it.
It's a matter of public record. Why didn't Boot get into that?
I don't know what he did. I don't know what he looked at. I honestly don't know. I did read the book, and I have some doubts. And I would probably bet on Andrew Roberts, but again, he has his footnotes in there, but I don't know how deep he went. I just don't know. I'm not going to judge.
I'll bet on Roberts.
I would bet on Roberts. Okay.
Now let me get to your fourth book, which I think I did not know about this fourth book, and I just ordered it from Amazon. It's a book on presidential transitions.
Yep.
That book is so relevant to what is going on now because we didn't really have a transition. Now, let me ask you just two questions on that book. Number one, I think it emphasizes we're okay, Al.
I just want to, okay.
But there were 2 points. Number one was the role that the head of the transition, later the chief of staff, could play, and number two is the necessity for cooperation.
Well,
I don't think we have either of those situations right now in good order with this
no.
transition.
In the old Heritage Foundation, I talked to Fulner. I don't know where politically he is now, but he retained me to do a book on transitions, which was going to be a follow-up on the Mandate for Leadership, which they did for Reagan. So I said, well, in many ways, George Bush wants to be another Reagan if he wins. He has a similar program. But we should invite the Democrats in and talk about process. And we do another book on policy. And I said, what would the process book look like? I said, it would have, I called it Keys to a Successful Presidency. What are things that would help Gore or Bush if we really want the next president to succeed as patriotic Americans? I mean, Jimmy Carter proved none of us are enhanced when the president is seen and ridiculed by the rest of the world. And so one key was organizing the White House. You just named it. Another key was managing the press. Another key was running the government. Another key was Congress. We can go on and on and on. And we had 12 public programs you can still see on C-SPAN, probably at 4 a.m. on President's Day. Anyway, and we had Brzezinski and Weinberger talk about defense. We had several chiefs of staff to presidents, including Leon Panetta and others, talk about running the White House. We had Ted Sorensen and Landon Jones talk about writing speeches for presidents. Sorensen worked for Kennedy. Jones wrote the famous Iran-Contra, I did it, but I didn't know I was doing it speech, and was seen as a great victory. We didn't get Noonan, but we had him. He was a marvelous speaker. Press, we had people who covered various White Houses. Bob Novak was still alive. He came out. Krauthammer was still around. He came out. We had transitions, and of course, we had Jack Valenti, who sadly was present at the saddest and most horrible transition anyone ever went through with Lyndon Johnson in Dallas that day. Anyway, that was the book, and got a lot of attention, a lot of reviews. And actually, we got letters from both Al Gore and Walter Mondale saying they wish they had Mondale wish he had had it when Carter came in. And Gore said he would certainly use it if he won. Maybe they were, playing with us a bit, but and Bush's people looked at it, and it had some effect. I'm not taking any credit for anything, but it had some effect. And yeah, that was the book. And sadly, or maybe not sadly, I don't know. They've chosen this time to target positions and target people, and they want to move in and move out. And I'll let it at there because I don't know anything about what they're doing. We'll find out in a few weeks.
Well, we're going to want to have you back on a host of issues, but I think that your role in the 9/11 Commission deserves a lot more than 5 minutes. Okay. So we will invite you back, and that will lead off the next show. All right. Your role at 9/11, because of the impact of terrorism right now. Al, my friend, I first met Al at the Republican convention in 1992. He had an extra room, so I got the room, and I was staying in a different hotel from the Jersey delegation, but we became friends, and we worked together when Brett Schundler was running for governor. Schundler valued intellectuals, by the way.
No, he was good.
And Al always has an intellectual point of view, but a practical political point of view. So, Al, we thank you so much, and I'll be calling you if you have to go to sleep now. Otherwise, I'd call you back tonight.
No, but it is a little late. We can do it early.
Go home and get some sleep.
No, we're okay.
And thank you so very much, and we look forward to having you again, my friend.
All right. Thank you very much. You have a safe night and a good night. Bye-bye.
Al. Bye. That's it for the Voice of Dynamic Political Centrism. We had a spectacular show tonight. And our mission is to try to resolve things through consensus, compromise, and cohesion. And that's why we have different guests who give us different perspectives. And tonight we were very lucky to have Al Felzenberg, New Jersey's public intellectual, on the show. That's it for this show. And have a good week. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much, Alan. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Join us next time on January 23rd. Catch the podcast on YouTube and Spotify and wherever else you find your podcasts. Thanks for listening.